Hello again, everyone. It's great seeing you again. I'm Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and thanks for joining us for Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, hazardous warning graphic. Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Delta, wind chill advisory out for tonight and into tomorrow. Therefore, wind chills running anywhere from 25 to 45 degrees below zero for tonight and tomorrow, with northerly winds, in some cases gusting as high as 45 or even maybe 50 miles an hour. And that's out again tonight through tomorrow for both zones. Also the Alaska range here, wind chills 45 below at times with gusty winds, especially for the eastern Alaska range, but also a wind chill warning here. Now in the case of the central interior, that's out until 6 p.m. Monday. Otherwise, along the Alaska range, that wind chill advisory is out. I think I said warning, it's an advisory, is out until tomorrow until 3 p.m. tomorrow, excuse me. And also wind chill advisory up here over the, or actually this is a winter weather advisory here, Yukon Flats and the eastern Brooks Range, or the southeastern Brooks Range here. That's for winds to 30 miles an hour, creating wind chills to roughly 50 below zero, along with blowing snow. Reducing visibility to a half mile or less at times, and that's out for tonight into tomorrow. And same pattern here, 3 p.m. Saturday afternoon, wind chill advisories are out. Kobuk Valley, Greater Ambler area, most of the Seward Peninsula, with the exception of the south coast there, White Mountain and Nome on up to Teller and Tin City, out of the advisory there. But northwest coast, Noatak Valley area, Selawik Valley, Kotzebue, Kivalina, on up to probably Cape Lisburne, wind chill advisory till 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Otherwise, the winter storm warning for heavy snow over the northern panhandle, that's ended now as conditions have, or the snow's lightened up there. Anywhere from 4 to 8 or more inches has fallen over the northern areas. And this is the cloud feature associated with that. You can see bulk of the moisture having moved through, some breaks showing up or approaching the coast here at picture time earlier this afternoon. And rain falling in the southern southeast. It was kind of a sharp line there where it changes over to snow. Sitka seeing mostly snow with this, and on over to roughly that zone between Wrangell and Petersburg. North, all snow, and then a mixture on down to the south, just plain rain, mostly across Prince of Wales Island, Ketchikan, and Metlakatla, where nearly an inch of water equivalent precipitation fell. In some areas saw more over the southern panhandle, some areas saw less. And again, the snow, half-inch water equivalent around Juneau, all fell as snow. That translates to maybe 4 to 6 inches of snow, give or take. Heavier amounts, though, in the more mountainous terrain. Have low pressure here lingering in the Gulf of Alaska, kind of spinning some moisture up, and some of that snuck on up this morning. Surge came across, brought some snow into the Portage area, Whittier, and came on down with some flurries getting into Anchorage here earlier today, and then broke out the sunshine shortly thereafter. But basically, upper level trough coming southward, very cold air pushing southward, winds gusting 40 miles an hour out of the north at Sparrowvon and Flat, and temperatures below zero here, and then southerly flow in advance of the upper trough here. So that's pulling some moisture aloft and keeping more clouds in over the eastern interior. The temperatures will be colder here in the western interior and along the coast than they will be over the east side here for the next day or so. And out to the west, you can see the cloud shield with the kind of a big cloud shield here, but the rain-producing clouds are back to the west, right across Adak and Atka there, in closer to the front. Pribilof's not seeing much in the way of anything, except winds kicking up 35, 40 miles an hour, both in St. Paul and St. George. And Nikolsky, gusts 60 miles an hour. Pretty good gradient with that front and the low center back out toward the western Aleutians there near the Komodorskis. And high pressure up in this area. That's created quite a gradient there. And again, those winds gusting well, up to 60 miles an hour, the Fox Islands, and big drop off as you head east here up to the Alaska Peninsula. But then northwest winds and north winds pick up their Kodiak Island, especially the Barren Islands, and across areas of the North Gulf Coast. Seward getting gusts 40, 45 miles an hour, as was Bligh Reef, 40 mile an hour gusts there this afternoon, Prince William Sound. And on the chart today, you can see a lot of lines out here associated with the windy conditions here, especially up over the western and northwest Bering Sea, the tightest gradient there. But even down in this area, as I mentioned, pretty good winds with that. And then with this low in the Gulf of Alaska, kind of stationary there, the cold outflow kind of regenerates it in place there. As the cold air comes out over the open water, it picks up moisture, pressure falls, rises, and the pressure falls. That kind of a self-generating system there, but a very tight gradient here developing along the North Gulf Coast and even the Copper River Basin, with Talkeetna winds out of the north gusting 35 miles an hour. Alaska range with the cold air, the bulk of the cold air coming down the west side here with the upper level trough in that area, and then southwest flow pushing the moisture in to the southeast coast. Milder in the south, rain today, and snow in the north tapering off. As I mentioned, the winter storm warning, heavy snow warnings ended, but still some snow up here in this cloudiness, areas of light snow, but nothing too significant from about the White Mountains all the way up to the Kaktovik Barter Island area. Otherwise, light winds up there at western North Slope Brooks Range, and temperatures not all that cold, but below zero. For tonight, areas of light snow continue with the wind weather advisories to Yukon Flats and into the southeastern Brooks Range. Again, that gradient there right along the mountains through the passes of the Brooks Range. Wind chill advisory there, 50 below zero with blowing snow, low visibilities. Stays windy here, south central Alaska, Palmer, Talkeetna, Susitna Valley, gusts anywhere, especially Palmer, because he gusts 40 miles an hour or so. And also along the outflow areas of the North Gulf Coast, band of light snow there, mostly from maybe Cordova eastward. And here another frontal system pushing mixture precipitation in over the southern panhandle. This front really beginning to weaken here as it tries to push eastward. Doesn't really make much progress from where it is today, but it does get past Adak a little bit. Stay breezy, but not quite as windy there for the eastern Aleutians. And you can see the ridge extending southward, and a lot of cold air coming with it all the way down into the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and beyond. And even probably cooling off out here over the central Aleutians. Rain today, could be mixed rain and snow tonight. And enough cold air wraps back in around. It'll be kind of a mixed precipitation yet tomorrow. That front stationary and weakening in place. Winds continue to lighten associated with it, except back over the far northwest Bering Sea toward Russia. But high pressure controlling the eastern Bering, high pressure controlling the western interior with colder temperatures, cold windy conditions here, and still this chance of snow with that persistent low in the Gulf of Alaska at the surface, also due to the southerly flow and the falling or the digging upper level trough out here to the west stays unsettled, damp, cloudy, rain in the south, best chance of snow in the north to the southeast coast. That continues into Sunday, but not to the extent that it had been. It'll still be areas of light rain and snow south, areas of light snow or snow showers north, snow showers north Gulf Coast. Kind of iffy how much of this moisture will get, or how far west this moisture will get, but Prince William Sound has a better chance than, say, Turnagain Arm. Probably the Wrangels will see some light snow and still this trough up over the northeast interior, and some flurries there at that trough now for the Arctic coast into the western Brooks Range. Windy conditions, tight gradient here, Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley, Copper River Basin, quite windy and cold, temperatures below zero. Let's take a look at the forecast lows for tonight. Not too bad over the Panhandle, lower 20s north to lower 30s south, and 15 to 30 below over the interior, except near 40 below, 35, well, 35 to 45 below here in Galena, up to the Kobuk Valley, northern Kuskokwim Valley, below zero, all the way down to the, well, definitely King Salmon. Port Hayden could drop to 0, 15. Kodiak highs tomorrow below zero. Back in the Susitna Valley, colder, barely, or not getting above zero, near zero in the Cook Inlet area, and lower 40s for the southern Panhandle, 20s. Eastern Aleutians, mid to upper 30s west, and the lows following morning looking like this for Sunday morning. Again, lows 35 to 50 below, coldest here to the west, not so cold to the east, but Eagle still dropping down toward 40 below, and mid-20s northern Panhandle to upper 30s to the south.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to aviation weather. Let's start with the flying weather for Saturday morning. Weak dying system over the northeast Gulf will be producing some marginal to IFR conditions there in the northeast. A weak trough in the interior, again marginal to IFR conditions there. Weak onshore flow. This pattern continues for the next couple days. Marginal to IFR conditions over the north slope. And again, there's that system still out in the Aleutians. And for Saturday afternoon, again, weak dying system over near the northeast Gulf Coast will produce some marginal to IFR conditions. Again, low visibility and clouds across the northern north slope and then down across the Aleutians. And then Sunday morning, we have a next system moving into the Panhandle with a widespread area of IFR conditions there and weak onshore flow across the north slope and into the interior with widespread IFR conditions. Marginal conditions through much of the Gulf down through the Aleutians and across the Alaska Peninsula. For Sunday afternoon, again, that system moving into the North Gulf will produce IFR conditions across much of the Panhandle into the North Gulf, down through portions of Kodiak Island, and marginal conditions out through much of the Aleutians and into the Bering. And again, that system with onshore flow across the North Slope, marginal to IFR conditions there. For pass conditions, Anaktuvuk Pass, marginal to IFR conditions during the day. Same for Adigan, marginal to lowering conditions during the day to IFR. Down along the Alaska Range passes for Saturday, Merrill and Lake Clark still continue to be VFR conditions, rainy VFR. And VFR conditions over Windy Pass, I did highlight the marginal conditions over the Tanana Basin for many of these passes. Isabel, VFR, but marginal in the interior. And then Mentasta, again, much the same there with VFR, marginal as you move into the north entrance. Tanita, VFR conditions there for Saturday. Portage, VFR. And for the Chilkoot and White passes in southeast, I went for IFR conditions early and then moving into VFR conditions as the system slowly weakens. Freezing levels, we're going to focus in on southeast here. They had some elevated freezing levels there near the southern end of the Panhandle with elevations get as high as 2,000 feet. Otherwise, the surface cuts across the central Panhandle and down through the Pacific, the Gulf region, and out through the eastern Aleutians and into the Bering. For icing conditions, I put in for between 3,000 and 5,000 feet, mainly across the southern part of the Panhandle there, but otherwise no icing conditions across the interior or mainland with pretty cool conditions, very little icing potential there, but I did have a below 2,000 feet across the eastern part of the Aleutians. For the jet stream, pretty good jet moving across Japan and into the Pacific, across the Pacific and into the CONUS with 95 knot jet moving through into the northwest part of the country, and then 80 knot jet across the Panhandle, Big Ridge with an 85 knot jet coming down the west side of on the east side of the high pressure ridge there on Saturday. 9,000 foot winds, weakening low there with 35 knots across the northern part of the Gulf on Saturday with that big ridge over moving out slightly westward over across eastern Russia with higher winds across there, but otherwise pretty weak conditions. And in the southeast, 35 to 40, even 50 knots as you exit into Canada. 3,000 foot, again, the ridge at 3,000 foot for Saturday. Pretty weak conditions, 40 to 50 knots across the portions of the southern Alaska range, and then there's that dying low in the Gulf. And what does this mean for turbulence across Alaska? Below 2,000 feet across Seward Peninsula and down through the YK Delta, Alaska range. I put in a little bit of isolated severe there with those stronger winds, and below 4,000 feet as you get into the Alaska range, and below 2,000 feet in the eastern part of the Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012. Okay. The Sumi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future. Exactly. So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Sumi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out. And they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models, are computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. It was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. It was a major problem for the mid-Atlantic states, a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy. It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, they reran the same model, They fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data.
Okay.
So we're going to put that over here, no satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out, back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation, 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey, is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts. And then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at, see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the ice analysis for this morning. You can see the pack ice is continuing to slowly drift further south and southwestward. We have some openings with lower concentrations here with that northerly flow along the Seward Peninsula and down here across the Kuskokwim Bay. Also pretty good and ice showing up in here in the Cook Inlet. We were notified that there could see some ice potentially through Shelkoff Strait with that ice analysis there edging out through Kamishak Bay. Looking at Saturday's southeast marine forecast, with that frontal system in here, we're going to be looking at winds from the northeast here in the Stevens Passage area, and then from the southerly directions over Clarence Strait, with winds generally from 15 to 20 knots there, over Lynn Canal from the northwest at 20 knots. Meanwhile, out on the outside waters, we're going to be seeing winds generally from 20 to 25 knots over the southern and central area, with southerly winds through that region, and then 20 to 25 knots across the North Gulf. Again, with that next frontal system, we're going to see mostly southerly winds, both inside and outside waters, with winds as high as 25 knots, seas as high as 16 feet there. But otherwise, Lynn Canal, northerly at 20 knots, and then across the north, winds from the south at 15 knots. For South Central, Saturday's forecast, we're going to be seeing some winds coming out of the Copper River, gust of 40 there, with otherwise sustained 30 from the northeast, with Prince William Sound generally out of north at 20. Otherwise, northerly across much of the rest of the Gulf region. Cook Inlet was going to be looking at generally winds from the north and northeast at 20 to 30, with gale force winds here in the southern part of the Cook Inlet with seas as high as 13 feet. And that continues into Sunday's forecast with gales there from the northwest at 35 knots through both the Kamishak Bay area across the Barren Islands there, again from the northwest at 35 knots. Otherwise, the rest of the region is going to be generally sustained 15 to 20 knots. For Saturday's forecast, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, northerly winds around Kodiak Island, 25 to 35 knots there, seas as high as 10 feet. On the south side of the peninsula, looking at winds generally from the north at 30 knots, and the north side of the peninsula there from generally a northerly direction with heavy freezing spray possibilities with winds generally out of the north at 30 knots. And for Sunday's forecast, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from a northwesterly direction, 25 to 40 knots in this region. South side of the peninsula, looking at, again, north and south side of the peninsula, looking at northerly 30 knots. And then in the Bristol Bay area, northeasterly at 30 knots. For Saturday's marine forecast for Aleutian Chain, generally winds from a easterly direction, 25 to 30 knots, more southerly direction with that frontal system in the area with southerly winds out there in the western Aleutians, 25 knots there near Shimia. For Sunday, again, winds from the east, 30 to 40 knots, seas as high as 16 feet there, and that easterly winds continue into the western Aleutians to 40 knots. For West Coast, looking at along the pack ice through Norton Sound, northerly at 15 knots, otherwise 20 to 30 knots there around the pack ice. Out on the edge of the ice, looking at northeasterly winds to 30 knots with heavy freezing spray possibilities. For Sunday, again, northerly winds 20 to 25 knots, 30 knots there near Kuskokwim Bay. Outside of the pack ice, just offshore there, off the pack ice, we're going to look at winds northeasterly at 25 to 30 with, again, possibilities of heavy spray. For the Arctic coast on Saturday, Arctic coast generally from a westerly direction, 10 to 15 knots with winds in the northwest, westerly from 15 knots through the Bering Strait northerly at 20 knots. And for Sunday, winds generally from the northwest at 5 to 10 across the Beaufort Sea and Arctic coast, otherwise Bering Strait 15 to 25 knots.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.